The storm within the Bank of Spain only grew darker as the aftermath of Nairobi's gunshot wound weighed on everyone. The sound of the sniper's bullet still echoed in the gang's minds, and her fragile body lying in agony was a reminder of how dangerous the mission had become. The professor, away from the chaos, felt the suffocating burden of leadership more than ever. He had just been deceived into believing Lisbon had been executed. He broke down in the forest, consumed with grief, and for the first time, his carefully constructed persona cracked. His sharp mind was clouded by emotion, and rage began to seep into his decisions, making him vulnerable in ways he never imagined. Inside, Palermo had assumed command, but his arrogance and cold detachment fractured the unity of the group. His obsession with the plan and his lack of empathy fueled conflict with the others, especially Tokyo, who felt the weight of Nairobi's suffering and Palermo's refusal to prioritize her life over the heist. The tension boiled over, and Tokyo staged a coup, taking command from him, leaving Palermo seething and isolated. At the same time, Gandia, the ruthless head of security trapped inside the bank, became the embodiment of danger. Cunning and merciless, he managed to free himself from restraints and used his knowledge of the building to wage guerrilla warfare against the gang. He stalked the corridors like a predator, armed and unrelenting, using his earpiece and military training to stay one step ahead. His first move was to ambush Nairobi, exploiting her weakened condition. What followed was one of the darkest moments inside the bank. Gandia dragged her mercilessly, ignoring her cries, and despite the others' desperate attempts to save her, he executed her in cold blood. Nairobi's death shattered the gang. She had been the heart of the group, the maternal figure who gave them strength, and her brutal murder not only left them broken but also pushed them further into a thirst for revenge. Meanwhile, outside the bank, Lisbon was alive but imprisoned by Alicia Sierra, the merciless inspector determined to crush the heist at any cost. Alicia used psychological warfare, pushing Lisbon into despair, taunting her with lies, and trying to break her loyalty to the professor. But Lisbon's strength lay in her resilience, and despite the torment, she clung to hope. Unknown to her, the professor was still alive and working on a plan to save her. The professor, however, was also walking a thin line. Alicia unleashed a relentless media campaign, framing him as a terrorist and manipulating public opinion. Yet, just as the professor thought he was cornered, he found allies among ordinary citizens who saw the heist as rebellion against the system. That glimmer of support gave him the strength to keep moving, even as his grief for Nairobi lingered like a wound that refused to heal. Back inside, chaos escalated. Gandia turned the bank into his hunting ground, setting traps, ambushing the gang, and even managing to capture Tokyo at one point. He dragged her through vents, beat her, and used her as bait. The gang fought back with every ounce of strength they had, but the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing moment. Palermo, though estranged, found himself working with the others when survival demanded it. His knowledge of the plan and the tunnels beneath the bank became vital, even though his pride never allowed him to admit his mistakes. Gandia's war culminated in a brutal showdown, as the gang fought to regain control. They turned the very bank that imprisoned them into a battlefield, unleashing explosives, setting traps, and forcing Gandia into retreat. Eventually, they captured him, but the cost of victory was written in blood, with Nairobi's death as a scar none of them could ever erase. Amid this turmoil, the professor's brilliance began to resurface. He discovered that Lisbon was still alive and orchestrated an audacious plan to rescue her. Using deception, misinformation, and his mastery of detail, he convinced the authorities that she needed to be transferred to court for a legal testimony. The gang staged a high-risk operation to synchronize her release with a daring escape, creating chaos in the legal system and using the blind spots of the police to their advantage. For Lisbon, walking out of captivity and reuniting with the professor's voice in her earpiece was a rebirth. The plan worked, and when Lisbon was finally airlifted back into the Bank of Spain, the reunion with the gang reignited their fighting spirit. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope returned to their side. But Alicia Sierra was not finished. Her obsession with victory turned her into a lone wolf when the system she served betrayed her. Accused of misconduct and abandoned by her superiors, she became a fugitive, but her resolve only hardened. Unlike others, she did not seek redemption, she sought destruction. With Lisbon safe inside, Alicia traced the professor's steps with ruthless precision, following every clue until she finally discovered his hideout. In the final moment of the season, the professor, celebrating Lisbon's safe return, froze as he found himself staring down the barrel of Alicia's gun. Her voice, sharp and venomous, declared, "Checkmate." It was a moment of suffocating suspense, where the mastermind who always seemed untouchable was cornered, vulnerable, and perhaps defeated for the first time. Season 4 was not just about the mechanics of the heist but about the unraveling of its characters. Each one was pushed to the brink, their deepest fears and flaws exposed under unbearable pressure. Tokyo, haunted by guilt, struggled to balance leadership with her impulsive nature. Denver, torn between loyalty to the mission and his love for Monica, faced the weight of responsibility as fatherhood loomed in his mind. Rio, still broken from his torture at the hands of the police, carried scars of trauma that made him reckless. Palermo wrestled with his pride, his grief for Berlin, and his complicated emotions that often blurred the line between love and obsession. And Helsinki, heartbroken over Nairobi, carried the silent sorrow of losing yet another person he loved. The Bank of Spain, once a symbol of riches, became a cage of suffering, revenge, and resilience. Every corridor echoed with the ghosts of sacrifice, every corner whispered of betrayal and trust tested beyond limits. Yet, through it all, the professor's dream of resistance against the system survived, carried forward by the gang's refusal to surrender, even when death claimed their own. Nairobi's death became more than tragedy, it became a reason to fight harder, a banner of defiance against those who sought to crush them. The season ended with the heist far from over, the gold still locked away, and the war intensifying both inside and outside. The gang had tasted devastating loss, but they had also achieved a miraculous victory by reuniting Lisbon with them. Still, the professor's fate hung in peril as Alicia held him at gunpoint, a reminder that even the sharpest minds could be cornered, and the game was far from finished. What began as a heist had transformed into a rebellion, and the world outside was watching, torn between seeing them as criminals or revolutionaries. Money Heist Season 4 was a storm of emotion and violence, where the price of survival was measured in blood, and the battle against power grew fiercer with every breath. It was a story of broken hearts, fractured loyalties, impossible choices, and the unyielding will to fight against a system built on oppression. Every second carried the weight of sacrifice, every glance was heavy with meaning, and every loss carved deep wounds into the souls of the characters. And as the last frame froze on the professor's shocked face, the audience knew that the war was far from over, and the reckoning that awaited in the next chapter would be even more explosive.